Oh, good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. Woo, February 21st is already here. I hope that this month has been good to you. I hope that this day has been good to you. We're honored that you've joined us this afternoon. Can Do Links to Learning. We only have, a couple more sessions left. So I hope you join and take in the good knowledge that's being passed on. I always think it's important just to take a moment to practice the pause in our worlds. Taking maybe 2 feet, you can put on the ground. Maybe you want to take a big stretch. Maybe you want to grab a drink of water, but just taking a moment, a deep breath, acknowledge, this moment, be present, acknowledge the gift, Creator has given to us this day. As that sun rises in the east, it's Creator meeting us for another day. And so here we are on this Tuesday, 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. What have been the gifts that Creator has given to me and us this far? So just take a moment, extend that gratitude, honor, the goodness and the gifts Creator has given to us. So we do not walk alone in this world. We're surrounded by all of our relatives. We got the animals, the plants, the sacred waters, this beautiful Mother Earth. We have, our other two-legged relatives, our family, our chosen family. So we're really surrounded by love, by goodness. And so I hope wherever you are able to hold that in your heart. So thank you, Creator, for the gift of this day and this moment that we can gather today on this virtual platform and just take in the knowledge that's going to be shared this afternoon. All right, so today's conversation is around Indigenous entrepreneur ecosystems. So many of the Indigenous businesses in Alberta, whether community-owned or owned by individual entrepreneurs, operate within an unpredictable and challenging environment in which they aspire to succeed, whether due to limited access to capital, equity, role models, mentoring, selling to governments, or other factors. The development of Indigenous entrepreneurship in Alberta can be considered in the context of an entrepreneur ecosystem. So it's modeled after the domains of the Entrepreneurship Ecosystem by Daniel Isenberg. So considering the domains or pods that compromise the ecosystem allows stakeholders to identify their place and role in the development of Indigenous entrepreneurs, while at the same time illustrating how ecosystem can be improved and enhanced and how the model can be customized and applied to their own space. So our presenters today is Rocky Sinclair, who's with the First Nations Social Enterprise Foundation, as well as Terry Coyes, who's also with the First Nations Social Enterprise Foundation. So we're honored, gentlemen, to have you both here to lend your expertise, to lend your thoughts, to bring us some knowledge around today's topic. So honored you're here. Thank you for lending your time, your voice, the story. We are so grateful. So there will be this presentation, but we also think it's an important opportunity for you to bring any questions or comments. So there will be space at the end for that, but feel free, because the chat box is there for you. Feel free to put, questions or thoughts in the chat box. I will definitely take note of them. I will bring them up at the end. All right, well, welcome to Links to Learning with Can Do. And I'm going to pass this virtual mic over to Terry and Rocky. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, folks. I'm happy that you set aside some time to spend with us this afternoon. Honored to have you here. And thanks, Michelle, for your upbeat introduction. I feel like I'm going on a game show here. But anyway, I appreciate it. And it's not our first go around with presenting this concept to Can Do. We did it at last year at their conference, and we presented at a workshop there, and we're honored to do it then and honored once again to do it today. So just to give you a little bit of background, we got a limited amount of time here, and Terry's going to guide us through the presentation. But just to give a little bit of background, how we kind of landed on this concept and why it resonated firstly with me, and then I shared it with Terry. It was like Michelle had mentioned, this entrepreneur ecosystem platform was presented to the city of Edmonton back probably must be getting close to 15 years now, 10 or 15 years ago. And I attended the event where Dr. Isenberg presented this concept in the context of scaling up business in different geographic regions. So it could be a large metropolitan center like Edmonton, or it could be applied to a country, could be applied to a community. So it resonated with me, and I thought, this is something that is a good vehicle, both in taking stock of what we have, but also leading us, I guess, to think a little bit about what we don't have and what might be possible. So we use this concept for the day-to-day work we do in our organization with like Michelle mentioned, First Nation Social Enterprise Foundation, which our parent company is, but I'm the CEO of the Alberta Indian Investment Corporation, but I oversee all activities within our own ecosystem, which includes for-profit and non-profit business, as well as a charitable foundation. So we've got essentially our own ecosystem created already, and I've been in the business in the Indigenous community for 35 years, 30 years with this organization, and from that experience, obviously, it's given me opportunity to learn a lot and interact with a lot of very smart people and communities, and from that have created, I guess, a platform that there might be some utilization possible for individuals and communities. So anyway, that's a little bit about my background, a little bit about the entrepreneurial ecosystem that we'll present today, and I'll pass it on to Terry.
Thanks, Rocky, and good afternoon, everybody. As was described, I won't. You've got an email or the description of the session today. Like Rocky said, we have done it before. We haven't done it in this short time period, so you're going to have to sort of just hit the high points a bit. Michelle and Elsie, remind me, are we going to leave 10 minutes at the end for conversation or question? Are we looking at sort of a 3:50 cutoff?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay. So let me share my screen. I had some issues with this before, but hopefully we're good now. And we can have a look at the Zoom, not the Zoom, sorry. Dashboard. No, sorry about this. Kick me out. Sorry, guys. Just take a second here. Oh, my apologies. Like I said, we had some issues here starting off, but I should be able to get in now. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to talk to you about this system. It has these pods or domains, as you can see here. I will try to go full screen at this. It's tough with these blockages with sorry. Can everybody see that okay? I'm just having some problems going to full screen on here. Anyways, is that okay?
Yep, we can see it. Thank you.
So we're going to go through these 6 domains or pods in the ecosystem, starting in no particular order, but sort of at 1 o'clock, we're going to make our way around clockwise. And like Rocky described, it's really an essence to try to identify what the supports are for Indigenous entrepreneurs in a region. In this case, we looked at Alberta. You can see here the various names of the domains that Isenberg has applied. What we've done is adapted and customized to Alberta and Indigenous entrepreneurship where appropriate or possible. But we've also left in some of the data from Isenberg, or some of the titling at least, that gives you a sense of how it was built. And we continue to populate and to add to the model as we work through. So we'll start with the finance domain, digging into that a little bit. Again, we're just looking at it through that First Nation lens in Alberta. And in terms of the financial capital, you can see there what it's made up of, between microloans all the way through to equity to debt. And in Alberta, and in I think in most of the other regions in Canada, we have the Aboriginal financial institutions. There's 4 here in Alberta. You can see the names of them there. One being Alberta Indian Investment Corporation, which is a member of our First Nation Social Enterprise Foundation group of companies. And the other 3 you can see as well that are spread out across Alberta. And also a Community Futures that's dedicated to Indigenous business and entrepreneur development down in Calgary in Treaty 7. So a little bit about AIIC. You can see that they're a developmental lender, as are all the other AFIs, been in the business for 35 years, provided 60 million plus in loans, and is a founding member of NACA, which I imagine a fair number of you know, but that's the National Aboriginal Capital Association. Capital Corporation Association. I think I'm missing a word in there. Rocky mentioned, and Michelle, I know it's a mouthful, but the First Nations Social Enterprise Foundation is the structure of the social enterprise that we run here. We wanted to share this with you just a bit to see where the organizations fall and have their place. As you can see, AIC is on the left, and that's the not-for-profit developmental lender. With some programming and some developmental lending services that it provides to Alberta First Nations in the businesses, excuse me. We've got enterprises on the left, Windfire Enterprises Limited, sorry. And from there, we have the for-profit operations. So one is Windfire Business Services Limited, which I run as a principal consultant. And there's 2 under Windfire Hospitality, which is the Home Fire Grill in the Wingate Inn by Wyndham. So there's a hotel and a restaurant that are owned as for-profit enterprises within the social enterprise structure. Again, all of them are serving Alberta First Nation business, as you can see there on the bottom. Rocky also mentioned that, like right here within our shop, essentially, you know, we've got different services available to First Nations enterprises and businesses. You can see there that the blue circles identify the services available through Alberta Indian Investment Corporation, and the white bubbles or circles are the services offered through Windfire Business Services. So you can see there that we've got a number of different services focusing in on the middle there with Alberta First Nation entrepreneurs and trying to provide those various products and services to support and help the development of those First Nation entrepreneurs that reside here in Alberta. Next, we look at the First Nations individual. Some First Nations, as you know, depending on where you're from, have microloan or grant programs. There are a few here in Alberta that offer matching programs where clients might be able to invest, you know, let's say $5,000 as an example, or up to $5,000, and the nation would match. So it helps them in terms of starting a business, a very small micro business, or they'll utilize that as equity to lever other financing and other grant funding that they might be able to get. So this is another component within the First Nations finance domain here in Alberta. So there's the loan funds. There's also First Nation owned institutions. We've got two here in Alberta, and not specific to Alberta, but Peace Hills Trust and First Nations Bank of Canada. Again, just another offering available to First Nation entrepreneurs in Alberta are these two institutions that operate more in the mainstream, are less developmental in nature than the Indigenous financial institutions that AIC belongs to via NACA. So that's a financial capital domain. Making our way around the circle, the next one we're going to look at is the culture and unpack that a little bit. So what we're talking about when we look at culture is, as you can see, there are some success stories, the generation of wealth, some of the societal norms. Again, this is the stuff that Isenberg has in his model, or where we thought it applied. I mean, where you look at the culture of entrepreneurship and the tolerance of risk and mistakes and failures, that innovative approach and creative approach, experimenting with different options and opportunities. There's the social status of the entrepreneur, wealth creation, and then of course the ambition, drive, and hunger. And we tried to give examples over here on the right of different organizations or clients, let's say in Alberta. And oops, sorry, I'm going to go back up there. My apologies. And maybe Rocky, I'll let you, I know this is an AIC client. There was the 3-generation example there that I'll maybe let you speak to if you could.
Yeah, I could speak on it a little bit. Just to contextualize it, it sounds a little bit like an infomercial of what AIC is doing, but it's a good example, I guess, that would serve, say your own community or your own organization, and how you might apply these domains that we're presenting in your own community or in your own organization. So in terms of this particular domain, the culture, the success stories, we just use an example, and you likely would either have examples or know of examples of those success stories and the kinds of supports that are necessary within an ecosystem to provide a leg up to help Indigenous entrepreneurs reach their goals. So just as an example, using Alberta Indian Investment Corporation and the work that we've been doing for 35 years, approximately 30 years ago when I started out with the organization, it was an entry-level lender position. And one of my first clients was an individual, and actually it was probably more of a family, but it was certainly the father and mother that were leading the business at the time 30 years ago, and was one of the earliest loans that I did with a Indigenous client with this organization. They also received way back when also a grant to help them out to start out, and went on to be a very successful business. They graduated through that experience a son in the business, and he eventually took over the business and went on to do more business with us and became very, very successful business through some very difficult times. And then more recently, we did a loan with his daughter. So 3 generations, and helped her get into business, and she received also various assistance within our own services ecosystem to get into business as well. So it just demonstrates, I guess, what might be possible if you create a ecosystem that can focus on where the individual Indigenous entrepreneurs are in terms of their experience and what their requirements might be. So I can't, of course, disclose much in terms of names and whatnot, but it's went from a couple of pieces of equipment to up to 80 pieces of equipment at one point. So very successful.
Okay, thanks, Rocky. So yeah, that's just one example. This is like the role model type of thing, the culture of entrepreneurship and ways that that can be profiled or developed. We've got the Indigenous Business Awards of Distinction listed there. It was the Alberta Chamber of Commerce pre-COVID did that. I think they've stopped doing it, but are considering doing it again, where they send out, and I'm sure again in your different regions of Canada or wherever you're at, might have call outs for awards of recognition to acknowledge some success in Indigenous business. So we have those awards of distinction here. Also the Bears Lair, I'm sure many of us are familiar with it, the reality series on APTN that identifies different entrepreneurs and asks them to pitch. And the same thing as the Dragon's Den and Shark Tank, right? Same concept. And I'm sure we've seen some of those. So just again, trying to profile and look at and say, what are the ways that we entrepreneurs are information is shared about them, and how are their role models or success stories out there that we can follow. So that's the culture domain. Next, we'll go down into supports. And this is where the consulting work that I do sort of resides within the ecosystem. You can see there that there's various types of supports between infrastructure, support professions, and non-government institutions. And we'll again run through with these bullets on the right-hand side some of what's happening here in Alberta. Whether it be entrepreneur-friendly associations or different entrepreneurship promotion, either government or non-government organizations. What there are in Alberta is what's called regional economic development alliances. There's also municipal organizations that profile and try to grow either investment in this city or the municipality, or promote and develop entrepreneurship. Again, probably similar to a lot of your regions, there's accelerators and incubators. In Alberta, you can see there's, some in Edmonton, some in Calgary, one in Northern Alberta. There's specific ones to industry sectors like the agri-value processing business incubators. So a number of elements there that assist in the job of supporting entrepreneurship and growth in entrepreneurship in Alberta. And again, these are open to First Nation entrepreneurs. The amount of traction within these organizations maybe isn't always what these organizations would like to see, but it is a growing level of participation, which we're glad to report. There are Indigenous business services as well that focus right in on Indigenous entrepreneurs. Windfire Business Services, as I mentioned earlier, is one of them. There's others in Alberta as well, whether they're independent consultants or other consulting companies connected to Indigenous financial institutions. The Business Link is a business service here, and they have specific Indigenous business development services where they try to stay on top of the information on business support and assistance available to Indigenous businesses and share that with the entrepreneurs and the businesses that approach them. There's EDOs, again, talking to CANDU. Of course, everybody's familiar with EDOs employed by First Nations and supported by CANDU. That's another service provider in this domain. A little bit on Windfire Business Services. So we're fairly new. We're for-profit, as I mentioned earlier. We reinvest into the social enterprise model that's dedicated to the growth of Indigenous business, where, as I showed you earlier with this organization chart, as you can see in the middle, I hope you can see it at least, that there's a portion of the profits that are reinvested from the for-profit side to offset some of the costs of developmental lending that Alberta Indian Investment incurs, and also into the Indian Equity Foundation, out of which there's scholarships and bursaries that are issued to First Nation students that are studying in the areas of commerce, management studies. And we are looking at expanding that to open it up to trades, because I'm sure, again, in your regions, there's trades, people that are interested in starting their business. So, if they can get some training in their trade that includes some entrepreneurship training, they're going to have, I think, a better chance of succeeding when they start their business. Again, we looked at this graphic earlier, but it just shows you the services that are available through Windfire Business Services to First Nation entrepreneurs that come through our doors and get us to help, whether it's strat planning, feasibility assessment. We do some training. There's some support after the fact that they get into business or expand, and of course, business planning. There's also Indigenous business associations that are here to help Indigenous entrepreneurs in Alberta. There's a few of them, as you can see. Access is Edmonton's Indigenous Business and Professional Association. There's NABA, which some may be familiar with up in Fort McMurray, the Northeast Alberta Aboriginal Business Association. Another similar organization in the Lac-La-Biche region, sort of the north central part of Alberta. And there's also Indigenous business students associations at various educational institutions. We put the University of Alberta's IBSA, as you can see there, but there's also others at other institutions. And Indigenous Tourism in Alberta we put in as well, which is a service where they're trying really to focus and develop Indigenous entrepreneurs in that industry sector.
I just add a couple of things, Terry. Just on the previous slide, well, the one prior to this as well. The bottom blue bubble there, the Root Entrepreneur app, or it's the entrepreneurial roadmap is what it is. So we have invested in a entrepreneur app that helps both institutions and individuals navigate the entrepreneurial experience. So it's an app that you can find and download on the App Store, and it's called, like I said, Entrepreneurial Roadmap, and that can be utilized as a tool. So if you flip to the next one again, Terry. So just as an example, I guess, on how it might be relevant to this conversation today, as far as developing your own ecosystem or populating your own ecosystem, is Access, the organization on the top, which is the Indigenous Business Association. That concept was born from actually founders that are speaking to you today. Myself and Terry and a few other people, Indigenous people in Edmonton, who thought there was a bit of a vacuum when it come to us organizing as an Indigenous business community within the city of Edmonton. So we managed to get that organization going about 2013 through assistance from the city of Edmonton, and just got renewed recently for a 3-year funding package from the city. So I think we're doing something right. But that's just an example, I guess, of how you build out that entrepreneurial ecosystem. If you see a deficit within your ecosystem, you say, hey, we got close to 50% of our population, Indigenous population, residing in the city of Edmonton, then we need to create services and organizations that are going to service our community. So that's just a bit of a backstory on Access.
Thanks, Rocky. So working our way around from supports, we get into human capital. Here we're talking about labor and educational institutions, both the skilled and unskilled laborers, entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, again, which I'm sure some of us are dealing with in our regions. Entrepreneurship training, some post-secondary education, as you can see there. So what we tried to do is unpack it and say, in Alberta, what are the sources of human capital and assistance for the folks in Alberta that are looking at trying to gain employment, whether it be self-employment or training and entrepreneurship. So we're looking at employment and training services. Here in Edmonton, we've got one that serves the First Nation folks residing in Edmonton called OTNL Employment and Training Services. You can see there that they help match workers to jobs. They also support entrepreneurship training. There are other industry specific. We didn't list them all, but we listed one here as an example, where we got the Alberta Indigenous Construction Career Center. And again, they're there to, as it says, connect prospective Indigenous workers with employers. So there's different services there on the employment and training side for individuals that are looking at trying to get a leg up. We also, of course, have post-secondary institutions. University of Alberta, University of Calgary, University of Lethbridge are the first three that are the big ones. MacEwan, I guess I shouldn't say they're the biggest ones, I would imagine, but MacEwan is very large as well. MacEwan University here in Edmonton. We have the Institutes of Technology in Southern Alberta and Northern Alberta. And then down from there, there's more of the First Nation or at least Indigenous focused organizations that operate here in Alberta, and some that are quite remote and quite specifically serving that First Nation population, and all of which have either management studies, commerce undergrads, etc., that focus on trying to assist the First Nation folks that are interested obtain that education in this space. There's also Indigenous entrepreneur training specific for Indigenous entrepreneurs. We've developed, working together with MacEwan University, what we call our Indigenous Entrepreneur Training Program that we deliver here in Alberta or remotely. We've built it during COVID, so there's a virtual aspect or option at least that we have. We also did some work with Junior Achievement in Southern Alberta. They've got some Indigenous initiatives down there where there's specific Junior Achievement training that they're bringing into the schools in the Indigenous communities in Southern Alberta. And as I mentioned earlier, there is some training and awareness about what the steps are to start a business that is focused right in on Indigenous entrepreneurs, that's offered by the Business Links Indigenous Business Development Services branch.
Terry, if I can just add a little bit on the Junior Achievement experience as well. That's also another example of our organization using kind of the ecosystem concept to say, what more can we create within our ecosystem that's required and that would make some sense. So, probably 20 years ago, I had conversations with Junior Achievement here in Northern Alberta saying, hey, how can we work together on bringing your program into the Indigenous community? And it was always my belief that, you need to sow those seeds and you need to get them young. And Junior Achievement, we know, is one thing that works, well in kind of the broader society in terms of commerce and financial literacy and supporting those children that may aspire to creativity that entrepreneurship might bring, and so you sow those seeds early. So it was something that we prompted from our own Indigenous space and said, hey, can we work with Junior Achievement to not recreate it, but maybe provide some customized support to the program? And that's what we did. And we actually run a program with Junior Achievement North for a number of years, along with other parties, and it included the Business Link as well some years ago, and it was a successful run. And then we went on to do some work with Southern Alberta as well. But that's another example of us as an Indigenous organization recognizing where there might be deficits or opportunities to develop more support services in our community, and took the initiative, found a partner, and created a good working model. Anyway, I'll pass it back to Terry.
Thanks, Rocky, for that supplemental information. I guess that it makes me think that anybody that's on this webinar, if there is interest that you have in a community or a region from youth or school aged, with the work we did, it was high school aged students that we focused on providing a sort of a customized version of one of the Junior Achievement programs. If you contact your Junior Achievement office, whether Calgary or Edmonton is the closest one for you, and inquire about it. I know they're both keen. Like I know Southern Alberta has a coordinator. Northern Alberta is looking at trying to do more and emulate what's happening in Southern Alberta. But if there is, like you say, a demand or a group that you're aware of in your communities in high school, and you're interested in having them or taking a look at the Junior Achievement programming, there was specific Junior Achievement Indigenous programming material that we helped develop. So customized to Indigenous students, that is quite good, I would say, and available on, in terms of requests to contacting your Junior Achievement office and maybe requesting that they come out to your community. So a little bit of extra information there for you. And thanks again, Rocky, for supplementing it. Next domain that we're going to look at is markets. And as you can probably anticipate, it's when we talk about entrepreneurship development, we're talking about entrepreneur networks. We talked a little bit about it before when we talk about the regional Indigenous business networks. This early customers bit, again, this is what Isenberg has. I don't know if this differs whether it's Indigenous or non-Indigenous. If you think about it in terms of product development and growing or starting an enterprise, you need all of these bullets that are listed here, right? Early adapters, some ability and expertise in producing, customers that are going to provide testimonial or reference and some reviews, and then getting your product to market. But what we looked at in this domain in terms of market, like I said, were these business networks. Again, we looked at these before, but they're the, and I guess there's an addition here. There's Indigi Connect, which is an Indigenous business directory in the Bonnyville Cold Lake area that's run by the local Tribal Councils Training and Services Association. That lists the businesses and tries to get more awareness of the Indigenous businesses, both amongst each other to purchase and support each other with sales of product or service, but also for the non-Indigenous business community who want to engage and do business with Indigenous owned businesses. It's a place where they can go and find out who's doing what up in that northeast area of Alberta. As I mentioned earlier, Access is doing the same thing here in Edmonton. Rocky mentioned, it got started in 2013 and has been working at trying to create that forum for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous business to come together and to grow and learn and network. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, again, in Fort McMurray, the Northeast Alberta Business Association that does a really good job up there in the oil sands area. And then focusing in on the resource industry, there's the group in Lac La Biche. Again, there's networking events, there's training events, there's lunch and learns, there's different offerings from each of these organizations. And again, imagine in your different areas of Canada, you would have similar type organizations. And as Rocky said, if you don't, maybe it's an opportunity for you to make some effort at looking at what's happening in other regions of Canada and why it might be successful and how it might be modeled in your communities. The next one is the regional innovation networks. Again, mentioned some of these a little bit earlier, and I know with their discussions with our organization and others, they're trying to appeal more to Indigenous businesses to take advantage of some of the services that they offer. There's a few here in Edmonton, as you can see under the Innovate Edmonton banner. So they're dedicated to startups, helping them, innovators, accelerators, and it's funded by the city of Edmonton. And then also this Startup TNT is another one that we became aware of. That's just a group of entrepreneurs that get together and network regularly. I think it's Thursday evenings, maybe once a month, that they get together and share stories and share resources and referrals to different sources of assistance that they might be aware of in their entrepreneur journey. The last domain at the top of the clock here is policy, and how policy is a very important domain in terms of supporting Indigenous entrepreneur. So in this area, we look at sort of two. I mean, in Indigenous communities, leadership and government sort of go hand in hand. So whether it's leadership in business in your communities, if it's separated between business and politics, or if it's combined, this policy is something that's very important to Indigenous entrepreneurship and helping develop and support efforts that are made. You look at some strategy in terms of leadership. We talked about role models earlier. That comes into play here a little bit as well. But it's leadership, trying to make whatever assistance available that can be made available in their communities to entrepreneurs, and really trying to grow that component of entrepreneurship and enterprise development. Same goes for government. I know we probably all have to deal with government, whether it's municipal or improvement district or provincial or federal. There is government programs that try to assist with the development of entrepreneurs through either financial or non-monetary assistance. There's also the regulatory framework. There's different reporting requirements and different procedures that the government imposes upon small business that they're always trying to make as user-friendly as possible. There's research institutes that help with some of the work that government's doing, again, to try to help dial in their efforts and make them as effective as possible with the services that are provided, and making those connections between Indigenous entrepreneurs and the services that they need to help support their efforts. And then the venture-friendly legislation, which can be affected through lobbying and advocacy by your Indigenous community leadership that might be there and wanting to support Indigenous entrepreneurship. So there's a few examples here on the right, again, in these bubbles that we tried to break down. The first one is community-owned development corporations. In most cases, they're private companies that are really social enterprises where the profits, in part anyways, are typically going back and being reinvested in the community in one way or another after the requirements for growth are taken care of for those enterprises. They're active in a variety of industry sectors, not narrowed to the resource industry here in Alberta, but there's many in various other industry sectors that are active and quite successful. There's a large number of them that are owned and operated by the various First Nations in Alberta, and vary in size in terms of employment and gross revenue. Not every First Nation has a band-owned company or companies that they operate, but many do in Alberta. And really what we're seeing is that there's a lot of partnerships that are being created with the non-Indigenous industry stakeholders that are interested in working with the communities and the companies that might be active or potentially started in those communities that can allow for some success, a win-win situation where there's Indigenous and non-Indigenous industry stakeholders working together. And again, I'm sure there's community-owned dev corps in the other regions of Canada that you're from. In terms of the government of Alberta, what's available through the government institution here, there is a Ministry of Indigenous Relations. They do have some economic development initiatives. You can see them listed there that are offered with varying degrees of success and sort of varying subject to scheduling and time, availability of funding, and cutting of programs or adding a program. So there's sort of a fluid level of support there from the provincial government. There's also some available through Jobs, Economy, and Northern Development, where there's the regional economic development specialists that reside in 8 offices throughout Alberta, and they're there as well to help out with entrepreneurs and connecting them with some of the services that they need. And then Alberta Innovates is another one. It's a provincially funded agency. And as I think I had in another previous slide, get involved with the Alberta Scale Up and Growth Accelerator program. So there's some various services available through the province, the provincial government of Alberta, I should say. And again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's the ones that we are familiar with or have dealt with in the past. And as I said off the top, we are continuing to sort of populate this ecosystem and add and unfortunately, in some cases, delete some of the assistance that might have been available to First Nation entrepreneurs or Indigenous entrepreneurs in the province. Then we have the Government of Canada, which, again, regardless of where you're at, Indigenous Services Canada and their economic development initiatives are going to be available. Again, we're probably, a lot of us familiar with the Community Opportunity Readiness Program, the Aboriginal Entrepreneur Program. That's the funding through the Aboriginal financial institutions that I mentioned earlier. There is the access to capital that provides the funding for what's called in Alberta anyways, the Status Entrepreneur Assistance Program and the Métis Entrepreneur Assistance Program as listed there. There's also the procurement strategy for Aboriginal business that the federal government offers. There's some work that the province does in this space as well, and the different municipal governments, again, from your regions. If it's like Alberta, they're making some efforts to try to connect Aboriginal businesses that supply products or services that are required by their governments, and trying to create those arrangements so that there is some commerce and some business activity that takes place. And there's also the regional development agencies. These are the what used to be Western Diversification, broke up into Prairies Economic Development Canada here in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. I think it's Pacific Economic Development in Canada out in BC. And then in the east, you have FedNor and AFOA in Northern Ontario, in Atlantic Canada. So there's the regional development agencies as well that again are trying to find their space and have different programs that are at times available to entrepreneurs, First Nation or Indigenous entrepreneurs, I should say. So that's the federal government, again, just a sampling, not an exhaustive list of services that are available to First Nation entrepreneurs from the federal government. So that's the policy. So working back to the wide scope here, we can see that with the Indigenous entrepreneurs in the middle and the various domains that support them, this is, again, as Rocky said off the top, an effort that we tried to make to, first of all, take stock and see where we fit in the ecosystem, where it might be lacking, where it needs some development and some further expansion. We did look at identifying some of them here in terms of areas of enhancement. In Alberta, again, this is going to differ depending on which region. But in terms of policy, you can see there that, you know, there's some work that needs to be done with cultural fit with the community and streamlining of legislation required for economic and business development that always can be improved from the policy standpoint. Finance, we see that there's a need for equity and access to broader networks. In the finance domain that we looked at, there was mention of angel or venture capital or venture investors. And most of the work that Rocky and I have done in this space for 30 or 35 years, you know, we've seen very few venture investors. And so we feel like there could be some work on that domain to try to, you know, assist, I guess, Indigenous entrepreneurs to access some of that capital and bring Indigenous business opportunities to the attention of venture capital organizations. The next one is markets. We looked at, you know, some area that needs to be done in government procurement, as I just mentioned, and expansion assistance. There's always, it seems like with the procurement strategy for Aboriginal business, you know, some good efforts, but when, you know, the results seem to be limited, at least here in Alberta. I don't know if it's the same in your regions, but we see that there can be some work done with government procurement programs targeting First Nation business. Human capital, again, what we thought was that there was, you know, some work that could be done in tailoring, curriculum and reaching out early to youth, as Rocky mentioned, with our example of junior achievement. You know, Alberta Indian Investment Corporation was a number of years ago and continues to you know, be supportive of trying to get some of the information about self-employment as a career option or entrepreneurship into the schools and get that out to the kids at an early age and provide them with some role models and some resource materials that they might use to guide their path towards maybe at one point in the future running their own business. The culture domain, we looked at role models and really a shortage. I mean, luckily there's a growing number of them, and I know Candu does a good job with the youth role models and the youth panels and other work that they do in that area and space. But there's always, it seems like, a very good level of reception to role models and a shortage. And as we go on, as more Indigenous businesses succeed and there's more role models, that's a growing and I guess a very positive point. But again, I think overall there's a shortage and we need to have more of them and have more of them engaged with the communities. And then in terms of supports, you know, something as simplistic as internet service provision in rural areas and paved roads are real obstacles to some communities in terms of economic development and the ability for the entrepreneurs in those communities to proceed and move towards starting and running their own businesses. So there's some work that has to be done here in Alberta because not all of the First Nations have quality ISP, and unfortunately in some cases have paved roads. They don't have paved roads into the communities, which again, you know, really limit. So those were, you know, in our world here in Alberta, our areas of enhancement that we've identified. But really what we wanted to do with this was just give you a sense of, like you said, taking stock of what's happening here in Alberta. It's a model that can be adapted and utilized in your regions or even in your communities. We've done it here on an organizational basis. So it's adaptable and flexible and can be used in a number of different applications. I don't know, Rocky, if you have any points. I've sort of went on here at length. I don't know how we're doing time-wise, a little bit over 3:52. But if you have any points that you want to finish off with, then we can maybe open it up for any questions.
Sure, I'll just wrap up with a few comments. You know, like Terry said, I mean, this is our experience. This is our experience in Alberta. You know, this comes from a place of kind of taking responsibility of our own environment in which we live and you know, try to thrive, particularly in the business space. And you know, through that experience, many years of experience, we're trying to create assets within our ecosystem that are going to help us. We know that, you know, this is not a complete ecosystem, and like any ecosystem, there could be you know, expansion or contraction in terms of what works, what doesn't work. There's obviously things that are working in other geographic regions that we'd like to introduce into our ecosystem. So I just think it's a good model that really resonated with us to kind of stay on top of the assets that are out there and the things that that are working. And it also puts a little pressure on others to say, where am I in this ecosystem? Where's our organization in this ecosystem? You know, particularly governments and policy. It says, you know, if there's a recognized deficit in there, then you know, let's address it, right? So I think that it is a format for people to look at to say, okay, if all of this is true in terms of what we need in terms of assets in the ecosystem, where am I? Where are we? And what can we do better to help enhance this ecosystem? So this is kind of the premise of our creation, and also our purpose in terms of presenting it to different audiences. And we do get invitations to different audiences, and it seems to resonate. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. And if we've got any, if we can address any questions that you might have, or you want to follow up afterwards, if we run out of time, we'll try to address that as well. So I'll pass it back to Terry.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Terry and Rocky. You just gave us a really great picture as to what's going on and the possibilities here in Alberta. And again, I liked what you said, that this could perhaps be applied to where you're living. So I think that this was really great. I had my eye on Access for many, many years now. So, you know, I like what they're doing. I like that they're part of this as well. So thank you for bringing some really good information. Great presentation. So this is from Robin in the chat box. Really informative in terms of understanding the current ecosystem. Have a great day. And so we have a couple of thank yous to both of you. Any questions? Let's open it up. We have a couple of moments for any questions that you might have for these gentlemen. And again, I'm seeing some thank yous. Really great, informative session. So very rich. So thank you for bringing this story, helping us to understand this resource. It's been really great. So it doesn't appear, I don't see any questions, no hands up. Just you're giving us lots to think about and perhaps lots to dream about and work towards, and the possibilities. So thank you so much, gentlemen. Yeah, you're doing great work. Mia, Sin. So lots for us to think about, just letting people know that I believe this PowerPoint can be made available to you. Yeah, Amber's asking. So I believe that one of the gals on the back end will be sending this PowerPoint out to you so you can have access to this as well. Because again, there was lots of really great information, really great presentation. So thank you so much for lending your time, lending your knowledge, lending your expertise. And thank you all for joining this afternoon. So we hope to see you again, and be well, everybody.
Thank you.